Rick Porrello, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Patrick. Good to be here.
You bet. Now, I got to start out with, I was going through your background, which is very interesting to say the least. You've done a lot of stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, this guy has got to be the coolest of the cool because you played drums for Sammy Davis Jr. Oh my God, I love Sammy Davis. The whole Rat Pack, that whole era is just
Yeah.
all you can think of is like, these were some cool dudes, man. What was that like?
That was the perfect word that you used. It was an era, and I caught sort of the tail end. I
Yeah.
was with him for 2.5 years as his drummer. I followed my brother Ray. He's 9 years older. He was Sammy's drummer for 5.5 years, and when he left, got tired of traveling, and they auditioned me. But I grew up in a musical family, and my father was a musicians union official. He was an old-time drummer. And he sort of wanted to manage both of his sons, and he wanted us to be the next
Oh,
big drummers. And so there were opportunities that came around, and we were able to cut the music. We were able to do the job. But I was young. I was 18. I was just out
oh,
of high school,
wow.
he traveled internationally. We worked a lot in Las Vegas, Lake Tahoe, Reno, Nevada, and it was crazy. And it actually, I'm sure we're gonna talk about books, the fact I'm an
Sure.
I'm an author, but that was the first book that I ever even thought about writing. Because after 2.5 years, I came home. I wasn't even 21 yet, but in the year that followed, people would ask me what was it like, like you're asking me,
Yeah.
to work and travel with Sammy Davis Jr. And a few people in that year that I came home said, "Gosh, you should write a book about that, or that would make a great book." And after the second or third time that I heard that, I started taking notes and outlining and putting
Yeah.
all my pictures together. And that was actually the first book. But then I went in a different direction, as you know.
Yeah. So your brother was a drummer, your dad was a drummer. So were you born with drumsticks in your hands? Sorry, mom.
Just about. But my mother got used to it. My sister got used to it. We lived in a pretty good sized house. It had three floors, and
Okay.
my father set up we called it the drum room, and he had like acoustic tile on the wall, so it sort
Oh,
of
okay.
didn't quite soundproof it, but it muffled the
Mm.
sound. And of course, we didn't play in the evening or at night, but during the day, look out. After my brother left, after he left, went on his own, went home, and then I eventually was getting ready to leave. There was a newspaper reporter that came and did a little feature thing, and he asked my mother, what's it like to have both of your sons gone now? She said she missed the drums. So yeah, she missed us practicing the drums. So go figure.
What years were you on tour with Sammy?
January of 81 to July of 83.
Okay, yeah, that would be the tail end of that like
Yeah,
really cool era. You
yeah,
know, the 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 Rat Pack guys were aging out,
yeah,
by then. And
yeah. The whole music scene was
yeah.
was changing.
Well, at the 70s, you had disco. And, then there was the disco demolition at Kaminsky Park, that was kind of like the death of disco for the most part. And then, you get into the 80s and it was like a whole new world, what it was like more like you had some very distinctive like rebellions almost against music. The punk movement really gained some steam.
Yeah,
There was some really hard rock. And then on the flip side, you had new wave. It was all synthesizers and electric drums. It wasn't like real
yeah.
drums, and so it
You had synthesizers coming in along with recorded music coming into Las Vegas and nudging out some of the live musicians, and that's when things really started to change. And 10 years after that, maybe into the early 90s or so, it just wasn't the same.
right.
Years ago, you could make a living as a member of a house band, and they had maybe, I don't know, maybe 10 of them in Las Vegas. You could actually make a living being the first alto sax player for the Caesar's Palace Orchestra. But that changed by the time the 90s came around. You really couldn't do that. They still had some live music, and they still do, but it would never be the same as the 60s and 70s.
Right. I get excited about this stuff because in high school I played saxophone, I played alto and baritone. And
Okay.
then when I went to college, I went off and I started as a music major. I wasn't good enough for performance. That's people don't realize that's a very, very small percentage that
Yeah.
can make a living, performing. And even like
Like
some of the
sports. It's like athletics.
oh yeah, absolutely. So I was going to teach. I was going to be like a high school band teacher.
Yeah.
But I love playing in jazz bands. I was playing in jazz bands like really early on, and I loved the music
Uh,
and there's just something about it. It's so cool. I absolutely loved it.
yeah. I miss not playing, but there's just not nearly as many opportunities, especially for a jazz musician to perform.
Yeah, that was my next question. Do you perform that much anymore?
I haven't been, my pandemic project, everyone seemed to have a pandemic
Yeah.
project. Mine was the piano. I had 2 years
Oh,
of lessons when I was a kid, so I got back to the piano and I spend much more time at the piano than I do the drums anymore. I filled in, there's a big band here in town that was stuck for a drummer about, I don't know, 6 months ago. So I put my set together and went out there and played. Enjoyed the evening, had a ball, great musicians
yeah.
and camaraderie and everything. But it's just the opportunities for that are minimal.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Now, do you have any children? And are
I
they
do. I have two
musicians?
kids. Yeah, they're in their 20s. Yeah.
Are they musicians?
They're not. They're not.
Wow.
I'm not sure
Okay.
if I'm happy or not happy about
Yeah.
that. They, I wish they stuck with, we tried to start them on piano, but they just do
Yeah.
not have a real natural interest. And like anything, it takes commitment too. You
Oh,
you got you got
absolutely.
to put in the time. I remember my father, he'd come home from work and almost always, would be 8 or 9 times out of 10. The first thing out of his mouth was, "Did you do your lesson? Did you do your drum lesson?" That was the thing. So he kind of cracked the whip on that for my brother and I, and we stuck with it and got through years of private lessons, 4, 5, 6, 7 years.
Wow, that's so cool. So, I guess this is cops and writers and not cops and musicians, but
Well, I
but
didn't know
I
we had that in common, so it was
yeah,
very interesting to hear that.
yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I played in a bunch of different jazz bands and stuff, and I absolutely loved every second of it. It's such a blast. But you were a cop. Why did
Yeah,
you join the police department?
yeah. Well, it started really very simply. My interest began back when I was maybe 12 years old. My mother, father, was early December. Said, "What do you want for Christmas?" And you know what I want? I saw this radio that picked up police calls. It wasn't a scanner, but it was this
Oh,
tunable radio, and it got different bands and you get like a fire department, police department, taxi cabs, airliners, and I
oh,
really honed in on the police calls. And I grew up in Cleveland Heights, which is one of Cleveland's biggest suburbs. So there was a little bit of action.
yeah.
It certainly wasn't a crime-ridden place. They're much busier now than they were, but seemed to always be something going on. And we lived right across from the high school. And that thing was on, it was probably on 12, 14 hours a day. Even my mother and father would listen to it, and it would
Okay.
be on low. The
Yeah.
volume would be low, and as a cop, you could kind of tell when something interesting is
Oh,
happening.
yeah. Absolutely.
Dispatcher's voice, they start calling any car in the area or multiple cars, and then we turn the volume up and we'd listen. So that really sparked my interest in police work. But then I had a cousin on my mother's side who actually became a Cleveland Heights uh, police officer. And as part of my junior high school studies, I think it was a civics class, I did it on the police. And I went to his graduation
Mm.
ceremony, did a tour of the police station, took pictures and all that. And that cemented my interest and it pulled, and I don't know if it was the same with you, but it just pulled me in.
Yeah.
And it had a grip, kind of like a calling. And I really believe it was a calling because people thought I was crazy.
Well, I think that police work is a vocation. And there aren't many vocations left. It's like, okay, like medicine or clergy or,
Yeah,
the law, those are like true vocations. And I really think police work is a vocation. It takes a special kind of person to, like, because most of us do like 20, 25, 30, 35 years.
yeah,
That's a big chunk of your life that you dedicate to that.
yeah. And you're not going to get wealthy. You don't get
No.
paid like a professional athlete or something like that. But uh, I think that most of us find an intrinsic reward. It's that inside feeling you're doing a good thing. You're going out there and there's excitement. Sometimes there's downtime, certainly in my city, probably not yours.
Mm.
There was plenty of downtime, but it was the excitement of just not knowing what the day was going to hold.
Right.
And but more often than not, where I work, it wound up being you were helping someone. Somebody's car broke down, and they appreciate that. Especially women by themselves break down on the freeway or
Oh,
something. I mean, you're like their hero for the evening.
well, you know what? I think all of us want to be the good guy. Even some of the bad guys want to be the good guy.
Yep.
Yeah, and you're the good guy. You're the person. And also, I can't say enough about the benefits of being of service to others.
Yeah.
I know it sounds corny,
I
but
think that's
man,
what life is about. I
it
think
really
that's what
is.
life is about.
Sometimes people lose sight of that. It's like
Yeah.
you get all caught up with, like greed and money. And I mean, those things, money is important. You got to pay the
Right.
bills.
Right.
But boy, just putting a smile on somebody's face or solving a problem. And hey, it's fun chasing bad guys at 2 o'clock in the morning, going really fast down a street in your squad car. I mean, it just,
Right. Right.
there's something like that little kid in you, I think, that's just like, hey, this is neat. This is fun.
Yeah. And that was really me.
Yep.
12 years old, I was the kid who wanted to be a cop. It's just I had all this huge other thing going on in my family that was music. It
Yeah.
was
So, what was the tipping point? Why would you stop with Sammy Davis Jr. and then go into law enforcement? What did that look like?
Well, I think, like I said, police work, it just had a grip on me. It was kind of a
Hmm.
calling. So as I started getting older, of course, you got to be 21 to be a police officer. So I went on the road almost out of high school. My parents knew I wanted to become a cop. They weren't terribly thrilled about it, especially my father, who was more looked for us to be successful in music.
Yeah.
So I was 17, 18 out of high school. I had a sort of a passing interest in electronics. So I started into our to Lakeland College, a community college outside of Cleveland for electronics, but it was all math. And I'm not a math guy.
Yeah.
I
You and
just
me
don't I
both.
don't have the mind for math.
Right.
So I was not doing well that was about the time that I got the call. It was the end of 1980 when my brother put in his notice as a drummer. Like I said, he'd been with Sammy Davis Jr. for 5.5 years. He
Mm.
put in his notice to leave, and he mentioned to them, they may have asked him if he had any recommendations, but he mentioned that he had a brother who played in a similar style. I was younger, I was 9 years younger, 18 at the time. And I had some experience playing shows in Cleveland, a little bit of experience working with a conductor, not much. Never worked with strings before,
Yeah.
but I got the call to have an audition, and that's what are you going to do? I mean, even if you have something you want to do in a few years, I mean, it was a fantastic opportunity,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
my father was, I think, more excited than I was for the audition.
I don't doubt that. So
Yeah.
you're on the road with Sammy, and where did the police stuff come in? Like, when did that happen?
Well, I mean, it kind of happened along the way because some of the guys would joke, and as I look back, I spent probably as much time with the bodyguards and security officers,
Ah,
bullshitting with them, BSing with them outside Sammy's dressing room or wherever, as much time as I did with the musicians.
mm,
Probably not quite right. I probably spent more time with the musicians and with the entourages, stage crew members, because we were buddies. We worked together and we ate together and so I'd say it was after about 2 years, I knew that I did not want to continue traveling on the road. I had met some great ladies, and it was difficult to have a girlfriend when you're
sure.
traveling. You're somewhere for 2 weeks, and then you're in Lake Tahoe for 2 weeks, and then you're leaving to go to Australia for 10 days.
Wow.
And so there was a lot of moving around like that. So that was difficult, but at the same time, there really was that pull. So
Mm.
traveling was sort of pushing me out a little bit, but police work was pulling me. And I put in my notice just before my 21st birthday and left. And I don't know about you, but it took me 3 years to get hired. There was a lot of competition. Gosh, I wish we had,
Oh,
200 young men and women taking a test for a small suburb where they're going to hire like two two officers. That's what it was like that back then. So there was a lot of competition. And Cuyahoga County, where Cleveland is situated, there it's chopped up into a lot of different suburbs. So
Mm.
in Northeast Ohio, there might have been 75 potential police departments I could have worked with. So there was always an agency that was giving an entrance exam. And it took me 18 I took 18 exams. I got hired off my 17th exam. It took me 3 years.
Oh yeah, I mean, I took the exam for Milwaukee, and I was just doing the shotgun approach. First, it's like I really, I was living in Madison at the time, which is about a medium-sized town. It was a lot of fun when you're young. It's a great place to live, and they were not interested at all in like criminal justice people. They wanted English teachers. It was just they had zero interest.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the test was a blue book. It was all written. It
Okay.
wasn't fill in the bubbles. Everything was like you had to write a small like story about this, then you had to write another story about that. They were laser focused on your ability to write and communicate.
Interesting.
Everything
Oh,
else they did.
important.
Very,
But
yeah, very. But I took the physical, I passed all that. I passed the PT test, but I just didn't score good enough. And like what you said,
yeah.
I took the test in Milwaukee and there was like, I don't know, 3 or 4 thousand people there for
Wow.
maybe two or three
Wow.
hundred jobs. And I took the written test when I was 26 and I got hired when I was 30.
Hmm.
So I waited 4 years on a list. I mean,
Yeah.
going through the process and being on the list. I mean,
Yeah.
competition
That's
was
dedication
fierce.
to the call. That's
Oh,
dedication to the call. Because I
yeah,
was ready to give up. I thought maybe,
yep,
God was saying, hey, because there were people, family members, friends that thought that I was, and I was in some respects abandoning my God-given talent in music
sure.
to some of them felt, because here I'm working with an entertainer who's really known as the greatest entertainer in the world back then. That's really what Sammy was known as, Mr. Entertainment. And so
Right.
some of them looked at it like a step down on the
Mm.
ladder of success. So I didn't have many people in my corner. There were a couple. Ironically, one was a cop and one was a musician, a drummer. And they said, Rick, look, you got to try it. You got to give it a
Yeah,
try. If you don't like it, you could always leave and go back to music.
that's true.
And
Yeah.
that gave me some mental traction.
Yeah, absolutely. But hey, I gotta ask, this just popped into my head.
Yeah.
Did you ever meet Frank Sinatra or like Dean Martin or any of those guys?
That was one of the questions that I would get asked when I came home, and in the book, I'm back to writing this memoir. It's going to be my
Yeah.
next. I hope to have a workable draft in about 6 months or so. I'm seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. But I was introduced to him when he came out just before rehearsal started. I was up on a drum riser making my
Yeah.
final adjustments. And George Rhodes, Sammy's music director, was down at the podium looking over his music. And Dean Martin was on the show, and there were two that I did. I'm not exactly sure which one it was, but Frank and Dean were both on the show, and out of the corner of my eye, I see Frank Sinatra come into the theater up on the stage, go across, head for George, and I'm watching this as I'm making my adjustments, and there's only a couple musicians up on the stand because this is
Yeah.
like 15, 20 minutes before rehearsal was going to start. And they hugged and they were chatting quietly. And then all of a sudden I heard, have you met our new drummer? And I looked up and he said, this is Ricky, call me Ricky Porrello from Cleveland. And, Frank waved at me and I waved at him. Hello, Mr. Sinatra. Nice to meet you. I didn't shake his hand, but people would ask me, did I meet him? And I'd have difficulty answering that question because I didn't shake his hand. But yeah, I did meet him. I was
Well,
introduced to him. That was the only time.
you
Saw
got a
him
lot closer than most. Let's just say
saw him
that.
one or two other times. Took a picture. I was a bit of a shutterbug, which was a good thing,
Yeah, that's a
especially
good thing. Yeah.
for the book. And I took a picture of the three of them, Frank, Sammy, and Dean, standing together. One of them, I think it was Sammy, that actually had a drink in his hand. Took two shots. One came out really well. And where that photograph went, it makes me sick. I can't find it.
Oh
I can't find
no.
the negative. I
Oh
can't find
no.
the photo. I had it on the inside of my locker, along with a couple of other pictures
Yeah,
of my wife, pictures of my children, my
sure.
locker at the police department, and brought all that stuff home, and was not the most organized person, and I hope that picture will turn up because I'd like to have it in my book.
Oh, absolutely, man. Would that be cool? But and one more, Don Rickles. You ever meet
Never
him?
met Don Rickles. No,
Okay,
I don't think we ever did a show where he was with us. No,
okay.
we did a show with Foster Brooks.
Oh, Foster Brooks. Oh my
Great,
gosh, yes.
yeah, that was the opening of the Presidential Museum, the Gerald Ford Museum,
Okay,
and that was a huge event. Sammy was just he did like two. He was a big part of it, but he only did two songs with the band. So we were his musicians were only a very small part of that, but
yeah, yeah.
got to see some of what was going on.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan, and I'm a huge fan of Sammy Davis because he just seems like he's just like such a nice guy, like a genuinely nice guy.
He was. I mean, we didn't really. The musicians didn't have that much contact with him during the show,
Gotcha.
before the show, after. Occasionally, we'd go out to dinner. Once in a great while, he might have some of the entourage up because he liked to cook up to his suite. I only remember going up there once,
Okay,
and sometimes the show promoter might have the whole entourage out to dinner. We did that a few times.
nice.
So it was more the stage crew
Gotcha.
that were more in contact with him because they also set up his suite. You know, they
Hmm.
don't weren't only responsible for the stage, but they set up his suite wherever he was, and he was, you know, had VCRs and television. He watched a lot of television, and
Okay.
he loved soap operas. Loved soap operas.
That's funny. That's funny. All right, so let's go back to the cop stuff. You get hired on in a suburb outside of Cleveland. What was the name again?
Well, I got hired first of all. I got hired
Oh,
in a tiny little town, part time, little town called Woodmere. And
okay.
people said this is going to what's going to happen. Everything's going to hit at once because don't forget, it's been 3 years now, 18 exams. Finally, my scores are getting higher. So finally, Woodmere calls me, part-time position. I accept.
Sure.
3 hours later, I get a call from the Mayfield Village Police Department. The chief wants to hire me full-time. I accept. I had to call Woodmere back and
Yeah.
resign from a job that I didn't even start yet. Chief understood, and so I started, and I worked with Mayfield Village for year and a half. Small, very, very small department. You know, most of the departments in Cuyahoga County are like that, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50
Okay.
officers. It's not like Cleveland where you might have, I don't know where they're at now, but they probably should be like at 2,000.
Right.
I'd be surprised if they're even at 1,500 right now. But so a lot of smaller departments. So I there just wasn't enough going on for me. I was I think 24 years old, so I got called to a department that I was already on the list, you know, on
Hmm.
an existing list. Just like you waited on that list. They called me, and I went to work for the Lyndhurst Police Department,
Mm.
which was like 3 times as big, and that's where I spent the rest of my 33-year career.
Wow. Very cool. So what was your career trajectory? Yeah, I mean, obviously you made it to police chief. You can't go much higher than that. But what did that look like? Like what different parts of the police department did you work and for like how long?
Yeah, well, I was a patrolman probably for, gosh, 12 years. I'm trying to do the math. And I remember I said I wasn't good at math,
Yeah,
so
you and me
I want to
both.
pull
So
out a
yeah.
calculator here. But for much of the first part of my career, maybe 12, 13 years, I was a patrol officer. As far as I was concerned, my trajectory was to one place. That was the detective bureau. I
Okay.
wanted to be a detective. It didn't work out that way. So I took the sergeant's test, didn't get it the first time. I think it was the second time, the second list, made sergeant. And I was only a sergeant for about 2 years. And then they gave the lieutenant's test. I made lieutenant. I was lieutenant for probably 9 years. Never had eyes to become the police chief. It was just not from the beginning and through
Right.
my career, the first whatever 20 years. But then, you know, the chief who had been there for quite a while, he was retiring, and I thought I got to do this, and took the test, came out number one, and I couldn't believe it, and it took me a while. We had some personnel issues, some significant issues that happened the first year or so, and it took me a while to really get settled in and feel like the police chief and eventually we had some people that retire, and some of the older the guys that had been around and older employees, not just the guys, but the gals too. They were
Right.
such a big help. because I had no experience upstairs. I had no administrative experience.
Well,
I was a patrol officer, patrol
yeah.
sergeant, patrol lieutenant. It's different, like, it's different upstairs.
Oh yeah.
And I say upstairs in administration,
So let
So
me
like I said, it took me a while, but they were so helpful. Then some of them retired, and I was able to get some of my own people that I thought had the same vision that I had, and bring them up into positions that were
sure.
open. And that's when, maybe after 2, 3, 4 years, I really started enjoying my job. I really did. There were a lot of challenges, as you can guess, but I enjoyed my last 6 or 7 years as the police chief.
Well, let me ask you this for context. How big of a department was that you wanted
So they had about 55 total employees and maybe 30 full-time sworn officers.
Okay, so like say your day shift, what was that? Maybe like four
Your
or
day
five
shift, you
cops?
might have 5 guys, 6 guys,
Yeah.
the 6 officers on the road. Yeah.
So I mean, like I have friends that have gone on to be police chiefs, like in, some like a 5-man department.
Yeah.
They're on the road every day and they have to do all their police chief stuff.
5 man total.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
small
yeah.
little,
You got like one guy on the road.
right.
You need backup, you got to call for mutual aid.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so were you on the road at all, or were you behind the desk most of the time, or what
I
did
was
that look
behind a
like?
desk, but I got out when I could, coming into work or leaving work. If there was a traffic stop,
Yeah,
if I didn't have somewhere I had to be, I'd pull and I'd stop. I'd call out, sit until the officer was done. I remember going home one day and our guys were all tied up, and there was a report of a burglary. It ended up being a good burglary. The suspect was gone, but they called the next town over, Mayfield Heights, and they sent one of
yeah,
their cars and me. And we all were going through clearing the house, and
sure,
until they got one of our officers, a couple of our officers, to clear the other call and respond. That didn't happen too often, but I enjoy doing that. Taking a half hour, going riding around, see what business may have left, what new business
sure,
opened, things like that. But I was behind the desk. I was out at meetings downtown, the county chief's meeting. Uh, FBI might have meetings that the police chiefs would be invited to.
sure.
Um, but yeah, but for the most part, I would say, yeah, desk job. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Now, I always ask people this is like, why would you want to be a police chief? Because you're the political pinata. I heard that's not my original saying, political pinata. I just remember reading that years ago
Yeah.
and it stuck in my head
Yeah.
because in Milwaukee, what would happen is the mayor would fall in love with the chief. It's an appointed position. You don't take a test for it, it's appointed.
Okay.
And of course, they want somebody that's thinking along their lines, politically, etc. In their kind of, you might have like a Law and Order kind of, mayor, and that's who he's going to want as a chief. Then you're going to, or like a broken windows, kind of person,
Yeah. Yeah.
or then,
Well, I think every
maybe,
every mayor should be law and order, but
yeah, but
that's another
yeah, we
story.
know that's not true, but they might say it, but they're not.
Yeah.
Yeah, or they might, lean heavy into the community oriented policing,
Yeah.
philosophies, etc.
Yeah.
And
And nothing wrong.
inevitably,
Nothing wrong with that.
no, but
Community policing.
there's got to
Yeah.
be
That's important.
balance,
Very important. Yeah.
you got to have balance, but you
Right.
got to know your
Yes.
peeps, that's police 101.
Yeah,
I
you
just,
hit on a key word. That's my key word for life. It's with my children. It's about balance.
oh,
If something's not right, check to see if you're in balance, but
right,
yeah,
it's like
such an important word.
I love beat men. I love having cops on the beat, but when the calls are piling up and you only have so many cops to take these calls for service, somebody's calling 911 because this is the worst day of their life. We got to come running,
Yeah.
instead of, shaking hands and kissing babies. It just, but again, it's balance. That's just the way it is. And in Milwaukee and a lot of other cities too, you see where this mayor falls in love with this police chief. Hey, we brought him in from out west or out east. He's got all these great ideas, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Or they love them for whatever reason. And then there's, a bump in the road. and inevitably there's going to be bumps in the road,
Always,
and
always.
how that's handled, you would see like this mayor that loved this chief, then all of a sudden it's like, now I'm going to distance myself from you. No, I don't like you so much. Yeah, we
Yeah,
had a fire and police commission that was appointed by the mayor. It's all intermingled. It's not separate. They try to say it is, but not even close. It's
yeah,
very obvious. And then they go from superstar to the worst person ever. We want him fired. They're
yeah,
calling, pitchforks
yeah.
and torches and
Very
hey,
unfortunate.
a
Yeah,
month ago you loved me. What happened? But again, if something, controversial, or it's just the
sure.
optics look really bad, even if the cops did everything right,
Yeah.
but it just looks ugly.
Sometimes it's the optics,
Yeah.
a lot of times use of force is not a pretty thing. It becomes a
No.
necessary thing. We don't have the respect for law enforcement. We don't have the cooperation. Uh, but again, that could be a whole other show.
Yeah, sure can, but we're not going to do that today. But, again, why would you want to be the political pinata? I mean,
Yeah. Well,
why?
like I said, I didn't my whole career. I mean, I
Yeah.
didn't, if you're asking that specifically, but but in a smaller department, I think, and certainly in our department, the mayor and council, for the most part, they got along pretty well. So there
Mm,
weren't a whole lot of political differences. And the politics didn't really weigh in like it would likely weigh in, or may weigh in a bigger city, much bigger city, big city
right.
like Milwaukee. So that really wasn't an issue
Okay.
for me.
Was it was
Unfortunately,
did you live in the city that you were the chief in?
I didn't. You didn't have to.
Okay, cool.
But I was just about a 20-minute drive away.
Yeah,
A lot of the officers and employees did live in the city
I was
or
just going to
close.
ask, would that be hard because it's like you're the chief. So everybody's going to be, you're at the grocery store, you're at your kid's like,
Right, right,
football game or whatever. It's like, chief, how come this? Chief, how come that? Blah, blah,
right,
blah.
right, right.
That
Yeah.
would be
Good
really,
points and bad points for even just a patrol officer living in the city.
yeah,
It's the
absolutely.
In fact, they might deal with that more because some guy they arrested, he might be
Oh,
the one they run into at the grocery store. You got to be a little bit more aware, and uh, but there's also benefits.
yeah. I mean, it's just strange because I had maybe a week on the job. I was at a stabbing. I arrested somebody. Then, like 2 or 3 days later, I'm at a music festival, and who's in line in front of me? The guy that I arrested for stabbing somebody.
Ah,
And I'm just like, okay, this is kind of like a wet blanket. And I'm a rookie.
yeah,
I don't
yeah,
know. I don't know anything. And
yeah.
it's like, okay, what do I do? Do I just, cut bait and get out of here? And then I'm like, well, why should I let this ruin my night? Of course it ruined my night. But, my head's like on a swivel now. It's like, is he going to try and stab me? It's just that's a really, people understand how much that the job really messes with your personal life as well.
Yeah.
It's hard to separate.
And when you retire, as you probably know, I'm
Oh yeah.
guessing you carry some of that with you too.
Oh yeah.
It's not like you retire and you turn in your badge and like that just goes away. You carry
Right.
that because you're in condition, at least condition yellow, like throughout your whole shift.
Oh,
Maybe when you're in condition white and can relax back at the squad room if you're having lunch in the station, maybe, but you go through, yellow to orange throughout your whole shift. And when you retire, after you're doing that for 25, 35 years, it just doesn't go away.
no, it doesn't. And yeah. So one last question about being the chief. What was your favorite or least favorite part of the job of being the chief of police?
I mean, I think the least favorite was probably unfounded complaints.
Oh,
Um, Yeah, I remember one complaint. It actually was the previous police chief, but we had a complaint. It was shortly after we got cameras in the cars, and we had a woman complain. She was giving the officer a hard time as a simple traffic stop, and she was giving him a little bit of a hard time. Well, he reached down to pull his radio up, his portable radio, to
yeah,
call for another car to come up to just stand by with him.
sure.
And she would later make a complaint that he pulled his gun out on her. And they were trying to explain to her, and finally they brought her in and let her see the video because they were right in front of the car
Mm,
behind her car.
yeah.
And she stormed out. She was pissed, but I think she was pissed at herself. But so the unfounded complaints, something, but you deal with them. You deal with them, and
Right.
and sometimes perceptions are different, and you have to accept that. You got to look at things from 360 degrees, and that's what I try to do as a police chief. And I think most officers on the road, that's what they're doing too. You get some type of conflict, and you don't just listen to one side. You try and find out what happened over here, and put the thing together and try and mediate and come up with the best solution, whatever that might be. So that, yeah, unfounded complaints. I like I said, I enjoy my time. I think here probably the worst part was terminating a couple of employees.
Oh yeah, that's
A
tough.
small department, a lot of us are friends, and
Sure.
got to the point where no, I got to do something. I go to the mayor,
Mm,
and we have to be done. We got to cut our losses here, and that was a very tough thing. It was the right thing to do. It was the
right.
right thing to do, but a very tough thing, especially with a smaller department, like I
Y-
said. Yeah.
Absolutely. I was wondering if you were gonna say community meetings because inevitably, I was getting prepped for my first meeting. Yeah, I worked nights for 17 years, so I didn't go to a whole lot. I got promoted to sergeant after I was on for like
Straight nights.
yeah, midnight to 8. I
Oh,
worked
wow.
midnight to 8 for 13 years, and I worked 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. for 4 years.
Okay.
So 17 years of my police career was, Vampire City. I was a night dweller.
Yeah.
And
Graveyard shift.
oh
Yeah.
yeah. But the good part was I didn't have to go to community meetings, for the most
Okay.
part.
Yeah.
And then I go day shift and my captain pulls me in. He says, "Hey, you got to go to this community meeting." I'm like, "Boss, I've never been to one." He says, "Ha ha, here you go. You're going, kid." And I'm
Good
just
old
like,
lieutenants and captains. Yeah.
"Yep." And I'm like, "Okay." And he said, "Just so you know, inevitably there will be a Jerry Springer moment. There'll be that one guy that's gonna stand up and just make a fool out of themselves." And he said, "It gets heated sometimes. You're gonna have to take it with a grain of salt." And I'm just like, "Okay, sure
Yeah.
as shit." The first one I go to, some guy stands up and he just starts hooting and hollering about I don't even remember what. And I'm just sitting there, I'm like, "Yep, I'm in Jerry Springerville right now. This is what's going on."
Yeah.
Did you ever have anything like that?
I kind of, my personality, being a musician and in that field, entertainment, I was okay with the community meetings, and
Okay.
really our community meetings. It wasn't like just the police chief, the mayor. I worked under two mayors, and they were both very involved with those types of things. So if you had like coffee
Oh,
with the
okay.
cops or something, you
Yeah.
might have the police chief. You have a couple of guys, a couple of the officers, if they're not busy, stop in, and the mayor might be there too. So,
Mm,
and again, smaller city, maybe not quite the same kind of problems that you would be fielding in Milwaukee, but sometimes you have that one person that's complaining, about something that an officer did, and forget about the other 99.5% of
right.
similar calls that went just fine.
Yep.
Nobody's interested in those because there's no entertainment value.
Correct.
You
That
got you
is
got somebody getting a ticket for speeding, and it goes okay, and they understand they did wrong. They accept the ticket. Some of them even say, "Thank you, officer." I hated when people said that. Don't thank me.
yeah.
But they go on their way, and that's like 99% of the traffic stops. But
Sure.
it's the one that went bad, that would there'd be video, and then that would wind up on the internet or complaint. So
Oh yeah.
we tend to judge the police on the worst moments, and we forget about the 99%
Absolutely.
of the time that they're doing such stellar work and serving people, helping
Absolutely.
people that need help, that call them, and
Yep.
but
I
again,
agree.
another show.
Yep, absolutely. So let's switch gears a little bit. Whenever somebody gets hired as a cop, there's background investigations. Now,
Oh.
in your family, there was some organized crime. Did that come up like during any of your backgrounds?
Oh, a couple times just as a joke though,
Oh,
because
okay.
here's the thing, Patrick. So much time had passed. I'm sure we're going to get into that, but I'll just say like the final moment that one of my uncles or grandfather was involved in that was not years prior to me. putting these applications in. It was decades
Okay.
prior. We're talking about back in the 1930s.
Right.
I'm taking tests in the 1980s to put it in perspective. So,
Sure, sure.
but the knowledge with some of the older detectives, older officers that had been around, yeah, they still knew the Porrello name. They knew the Leonardo name, and of course the more modern organized crime names. I won't even bother mentioning those,
Sure.
but we're talking about history, like ancient history when we're talking
Yeah.
about my family.
Because
So no, it wasn't a problem.
oh,
No.
okay. So your grandpa was killed, right? Like in a
He was
mob
killed,
contract?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was killed in 1932, and that's how I got interested in writing about and researching organized crime.
Yeah.
When I was 10 years old or so, that age, I heard a little bit that, my paternal grandfather was murdered and it had something to do with the mob. But that's pretty much all I heard. There was
Okay.
nothing else. There was no discussion about it, no
Yeah.
filling in details. My father was only I think 5 or 6 when his father was killed. So
Mm.
he didn't even know a whole lot. But he became a union official for the musicians union. So he kind
Oh,
of
okay.
was on the edges. He knew some of the
Sure.
old timers because he had that name. There was
Oh, sure, sure.
yeah, there was that name. So he was sort of on the edge, but smart enough not to get too involved or really get involved at all, um, because he might have wound up in prison or dead like some of them would in the
Right. So let me ask you
1970s.
this. Speaking of like mobsters and organized crime, why as a culture are we so fascinated with this? The Godfather, Sopranos, Scarface,
Yeah.
Casino, Kill the Irishman. Yeah, it's just people are drawn to it.
Yeah, they are, and I've been fortunate to have a nice sideline that I do these presentations about organized crime history in Northeast Ohio, or otherwise based on the books that I've written. I get asked that question sometimes, and I
Mhm.
think it's this: the vast majority of us, almost all of us, are kind of in the middle of society. We're sort of in the average line here. And so there's a natural curiosity about, from the perspective of the camera. Down here on the left are the child abusers, serial killers, serial rapists, the dredges of society. And then up here on this end, over to the right, are the rich, the powerful, the famous, the famous actresses and actors, politicians, and
Like
other
sports figures and
entertainers.
all that. Yeah,
And there's
sure.
just a natural curiosity about them. And I think that that's just part of humanity, the way we're hardwired.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me.
And then you
Now,
have The Godfather. You have the book come out. Then you have the movie, which is still, I see it as number one in a lot of
oh
the
yeah,
greatest movies of all time. A lot of lists still have The Godfather as number one. You have this movie that you have this violent, secretive society and
right.
secrecy. There's a sort of a curiosity and attraction just to something that's secret. Oh, it's secret. I want to know more, right? So there's this secret organization. Of course, we know it's not secret anymore,
Right.
but secret back then when this story is going on, and what's it set back in the 40s or 50s, I think, and very powerful. But in the backdrop is the Italian culture, the beautiful Italian culture, the focus on family, and that togetherness, that loyalty
Sure.
amongst family members, the food, the
Sure.
Roman Catholic religion, and
Oh
this
yeah.
this beautiful culture that is married to this violent secret organization, and the conflict and disloyalty. And I think that marriage of elements just created an iconic motion picture that further created this curiosity about organized crime.
So I did read your book that The
Ah, the
Rise
first
and
book, yeah,
Fall of the Cleveland Mafia. Absolutely love
first
it.
one,
Blood and corn sugar and blood.
Orange Sugar and
Loved
Blood.
it.
Yeah,
It's a great book.
thank
And
you.
so in this book and in other books that I've read, there's talk of omerta. That's a
Omerta,
huge
yeah.
deal in mob culture. Could you kind of explain that a little bit?
I'm trying to learn Italian, and I remember Omerta. I think it might be honor, if I'm not
I think
mistaken.
it.
I think it's translated as honor. There might be another translation too, but basically it's the Sicilian code of silence. You know, the mafia, at least La Cosa Nostra, that traditional organized crime that came to America in the late
Mhm.
1800s, early 1900s. They had a code. All these organized crime groups, criminal groups, they have a code of silence. You know, you don't tell on your
You
the
don't
other
rat.
organization,
Yep.
under penalty of death.
Yep.
So omerta became a tenet of membership in the organization. You swear an oath to secrecy. So
Okay.
that's where that concept
Gotcha.
comes in, that word. Yeah.
Now, writing the book, The Rise and Fall of the Cleveland Mafia, Corn, Sugar, and Blood, which I love the title. That's awesome. You know, I think it was in the book, or maybe I read it somewhere else or heard it, that your father was kind of giving you a little bit of pushback when you're writing the book, right?
Oh yeah, in the beginning when I told him I wanted to write about this, he wasn't happy.
What'd
Yeah.
that look like?
Yeah, well, I wasn't really writing at first. I was researching because I was curious about the murder of my grandfather and three of his
Yeah.
brothers, my uncles, my granduncles, great uncles. So there were four Porrello brothers out of seven that came to this country from a town in Sicily called Licata, Sicily, along with four Leonardo brothers who in Sicily were friends, and that's kind of how the story starts off. But so I was only researching, and I was researching in our wonderful public library. Can't thank them enough. Even still, of course, a lot of it is done online now. But
Yeah.
I went in and got dates of things that happened, murders that happened, and went through the microfilm in the newspaper archives, and the librarians would help me. Here's how you make a copy, and so forth. And I'd bring these copies home and show my father. And now he was starting to get curious because, like I said,
Okay.
only 5 or 6 when his father was killed. He
Yeah.
heard bits and pieces from the old timers and from the anniversary articles that would inevitably come out in the newspapers, and it would piss off some of my cousins and some members of my family is like they have to dredge this up again, which was also a sort of a theme with me too. Like some of my father's cousins, they weren't thrilled about this either.
Right.
But what I was doing was in the beginning was learning, like what was it all about? And I think the like my generation and even a little bit older, ones that might have been 10 years older, my cousins I'm speaking of, I think when the book finally came out, they found value in it because
Mhm.
it put together a big picture so they could understand why their uncle, why their grandfather was killed. What was this thing all about? What was the sugar war about? What was the conflict between the Porrello brothers and the Leonardo brothers? How did that factor in during Prohibition? What was corn sugar? How did the Mayfield Road mob factor in? And what was all the bloodshed about? So, and how did it become really the beginning of the mafia in Cleveland? And then how did it factor into events nationally in later years? So it answered a lot of these questions because, who wants to, excuse me, who wants to go through life knowing that you had a grandfather that was murdered, but you don't, it had to do with the mafia, but that's all you know.
Yeah.
When
Right.
you're in your 30s, you're in your 40s, you're in your 50s. Maybe you have children, and they ask, "Well, I really don't know anything about it." But your great grandfather was murdered. So it was just sort of a natural curiosity to learn more. But then the story I just realized was huge. Like I said, it was the beginning of the mafia in Cleveland, and then events, in later years, major headlines, and it just pulled me in, and I thought this has to be a book. And I never aspired to write a book before. I didn't know anything about it, but I started putting together an outline. I was a
Yeah.
good English student in school. I knew how to write, but I didn't know how to write a book. But I learned as I went along. It took me 9 years.
Oh
It took
yeah.
about 6 years. About 6 years
Okay.
to write the book, and then it overlapped another three years to get published. So it
Gotcha.
was a labor of love, really.
Outstanding. Yeah, again, I absolutely loved it. It encapsulates, a really great story of, the rise and fall of the mafia in the Cleveland area. Stuff that I didn't think that, and I should have. Cleveland's a big city, of course. there's going to be organized crime, it's tied in with the unions, etc. I mean, that makes sense to me. But one thing that really stood out was Elliot Ness coming to Cleveland to clean up the police department.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there was corruption, in every big city police department, and Elliot Ness came in, and I only knew him from watching The Untouchables.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's about all I knew about organized crime and Elliot Ness. I don't know how well he was portrayed in that series, but I think it starred Robert Stack played
Yeah, Robert Stack. Yep.
Ness, right? Yeah. But that came sort of after the the Porrellos were out of
Oh, okay.
power, and the Mayfield Road Mob was coming into power. Well, they had been during that. It was a much bigger, much more powerful organization, and they would become what would be known in later years as the Cleveland Mafia, in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and then into the 70s and 80s. That's where they originated from
Yeah.
the road.
Yeah, but I thought that was neat. It's like, wow, Elliot Ness and the Untouchables were in
Oh
Cleveland.
yeah,
You always
yeah,
just think about, Al Capone, and the whole story with Kevin Costner and Sean Connery, and that's yeah, I thought that was really neat.
yeah. He
I
came in
enjoy.
as the safety director, and I think that was in the mid to later 30s, I believe. And
Wow,
yeah.
that's really cool. So, obviously you got to do a whole bunch of research when you're doing these, projects.
Mhm.
Any funny or interesting stories regarding that? Were you like interviewing people or strictly like library and Google, or how do you
No,
do it?
back then it was the libraries.
Yeah.
To get the newspaper archives, and Cleveland
Uh,
had two or three major newspapers, two at the time, like in the 60s, 70s, and then back during the 20s and 30s, there might have been two others. I think there was four. And the library system, Cleveland and Cuyahoga County, they had all of it. So I spent a lot of time there. You could get magazine articles, and there were those coverage, especially at Cleveland Magazine. They did some superior investigative work during especially during the 1970s and early 80s on Cleveland organized crime. I did interview some old timers that were around. They were in their 70s and
yeah.
early 80s. And I think one of the funniest things, I had one guy that did not want to talk on the phone. I mean, now
Okay.
we're talking about things. This is like I came off the road in 83. So we're talking about 84, 85, 80, I became a cop in 86. I'm still
Yeah.
researching in my spare time. So this is the mid 80s, and we're talking about things that happened like in the 20s and
The
in
30s.
ended in the mid 30s.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
But
a
he
while
was
ago.
like,
Yeah.
I mean, this like impacted him so much, and he was so concerned. He didn't want to talk on the phone. He wanted to meet me in person, and I just kind of got a chuckle out of that. But
Sure. That's awesome. That
but
that
met some
really is.
great people along the way, and like I said, it took about 6 years to get the main part written, and then another 3 years to find a publisher, and finally found Barricade Books,
Okay.
Lyle and Carol Stewart, and finally that thing was published. And swore I would never write another book. You know what it's like. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's a commitment.
It,
It takes time.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's absolutely. So the names for your books. I mean, you got Kill the Irishman, Corn, Sugar, and Blood. How do you come up with these? These are great titles.
Yeah, well, Corn Sugar and Blood is the subtitle, and Corn
Yeah.
Sugar and Blood, I think, came from a newspaper article back during this war over sugar, and sugar, in particular corn sugar, was a main ingredient in corn liquor. So it was a very lucrative business to be in, and that's what my ancestors were involved in. So I think I may have read a newspaper article, and it said something about this corn, sugar, and blood war or something like
Okay.
that. So I thought, okay, I like that, but I don't want that to be the title. And
Yeah.
I finally came up with The Rise and Fall of the Cleveland Mafia, because that's really what the story was about.
Sure.
The rise. The rise and fall of the Cleveland Mafia, but it had corn, sugar, and blood as a subtitle. But the way the publisher designed the cover, Corn, Sugar, and Blood was too prominent, and a lot of people
Okay.
thought that was the title.
Oh, okay.
So when I obtained my rights back, which I did about 2 years ago, and re-released the book and freshened up the cover a little bit,
Mm.
I pulled back the Corn, Sugar, and Blood, the subtitle, make it a little bit less prominent. Yeah.
Interesting.
But yeah, To Kill the Irishman, I think I got that from a documentary because
Oh, okay.
Danny Green, I don't know if you how much you want to talk about him, but he was a rogue mob associate, and the mob went up against him in a 1970s bombing war. And he was there. There was a documentary, one of the first ones, and they said something like "To Kill the Irishman" became the one goal of the Cleveland mob. To kill the Irishman became their
Yeah.
goal. To kill the Irishman. So it stuck in my head, and that became the title of the book.
So,
Just something in passing that I heard in the
that's
documentary.
awesome. So with that book, the story of Danny Green, where were you in your writing career? How many books have you written before you wrote this book?
Well, just the one, just the
Oh,
one,
okay. So
and
this was your second book?
it was my second book. And like I said,
Wow.
Patrick, it's such a commitment to write a book. Takes a lot of time.
It is.
And I swore I would never write a book, but then, a publisher will send you a case of books like hot off the press. I was newly married. My wife had a bottle of champagne. We open up, we toast. Finally, this thing, a 9-year project. This book is published. It's out. It's on the shelf. And I swore I'd never write another book. But when I got that book, when I opened up that case of books and got it in my hand, the first thing I thought is, I got to do this again. And I had a police friend in the first department that I worked with, a good Irishman. His name was Patrick also.
Good
And he
man.
was saying all along, why are you writing about that stuff from the 20s and 30s? You should be writing about Danny Green. It's more current. He's such a colorful character. He went up against the mob. He had balls. He was courageous. And so that wound up being one of the reasons why I covered it in the last
Mm,
couple of chapters, the last few chapters of The Rise and Fall of the Cleveland Mafia, but why I thought, okay, that story has to be a book in and of itself. So
right.
then I went back to some of the research that overlapped,
Oh, okay.
started writing that book, and that became my self book, my first self-published book.
Okay, gotcha. So, yeah, I watched the movie because I didn't read the book, but I did buy the book. I'm gonna read the book too. But the eventual killing of Danny Green, did it really bring down the Cleveland mob, and it kind
Well,
of
I,
had a
I
ripple
believe that
effect?
it sparked events that brought down
Okay.
not only in Cleveland but really nationally because it produced a man who was known at the time as the highest ranking mobster to betray omerta. There's that word
Yep.
again, to betray the Sicilian code of silence and go to work for the federal government. And that guy's name was Angelo Leonardo. He was the son of the mob boss that was killed during the Sugar War back in the 20s and
Okay.
30s. He
Okay.
rose through the ranks. He avenged his father's murder when he was 18, I think. Rose through the ranks to become the acting boss when the Cleveland mob boss James Licavoli, went to prison. So that was huge because he was just not known like a guy like Gravano, Sammy the Bull Gravano. He wasn't known like that because he didn't do documentaries. He didn't go on talk shows. He
Mm,
just did what he had to do to get out of prison. And
gotcha.
but he knew the history from the beginning because again his father was a mob boss and he knew the rules. He knew how this thing came from Sicily and was organized here. He knew that there were crime families, mafia families
Sure.
all across the country. There were like, depending on how you count them, like maybe 2 dozen. And I think you mentioned something like that before,
Yeah.
like you were surprised to kind of hear about
Yeah.
Cleveland, maybe having a mafia family. Then it dawns on you, well, yeah, Cleveland, big city.
It's a big
Well, there were
city.
maybe
Sure.
2 dozen. Yeah, Milwaukee, Kansas City,
Oh, yeah.
Chicago, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and a lot of people think when they think mafia, they think maybe New York, the five families, and maybe
Right.
Chicago.
Absolutely.
Maybe they think Las Vegas, but yeah, at one time there were roughly two dozen families. And I'm told that my book was the first regional, mafia book,
Yeah.
a book not about New York or Chicago, and that it sparked a sort of I'm not sure if you'd say a flood, but it sparked dozens of other titles
Mm,
about the mob in these other cities like Kansas City and Philadelphia.
gotcha. Now, while watching the movie, one thing that stood out to me was the use of bombs. It was like I was watching a movie about Belfast, during the Troubles, and I'm like, this is the United States, for God's sakes. How true was that? That
Yeah.
they're blowing. It seemed like every day they were blowing somebody up.
Yeah, bombs were definitely the weapon of choice, and it seemed like that, but that's not really what was going on. So for every bombing, there wasn't a murder. You know, sometimes a bomb was sent and put on the back door of a bar to send a message.
Mm.
Maybe somebody's car was blown up to send a message, to send a warning. So it wasn't, and they weren't all, you know, these huge bombings, but of course, bombings in and of themselves are notable newsworthy events
Oh
because,
yes, they are. Yes,
you know, there's that bomb at that back door of that bar. Well, if somebody's walking by when it detonates, they could be killed,
sure.
you know.
Yep.
And there were instances in Cleveland and also in the Mahoning Valley, Youngstown, where in an earlier period of time, the 50s and 60s, bombs were the weapon of choice.
Mm.
There were times where innocent people were killed. In Youngstown, there was a young child that was killed. His brother was seriously injured when the father was targeted and murdered through the use of a bomb. In Cleveland, there was a neighbor of one of the mafia soldiers who was killed because a bomb was placed on on a car, and he went to move the car, and he was murdered there. So there was few instances like
Okay.
that, and it was there. There were, I mean, there were a lot of bombings. I think I read that the alcohol, tobacco, the ATF, alcohol,
Yeah.
tobacco, firearms at the time, you know, the federal agency charged with investigating bombings, I think tripled it tripled its staffing for this part of
Wow.
Ohio, and I think they might have even moved their district office. They may have moved it to Cleveland.
Yeah.
So it was a problem. It was a
Yeah. Wow. So
Yeah, and
yeah, there was one scene where Danny Green's in bed with his girlfriend, and the whole house gets blown up. I mean, how
yeah,
factual is? And then he just like walks away, and I'm like, come
that's
on,
absolutely factual. They did walk away.
really?
He may have had a broken rib. He maybe had some other minor injuries. I think the young girl, if anything, she may have had minor injuries, as I recall. But it was a two-story small apartment building.
Yeah.
Lived up on top, and then he had his office on the bottom. It was a pretty small building, and it was demolished by this bomb. There's actually a second bomb that was placed, but the triggering mechanism was not set correctly, and it didn't go off.
Oh,
And the
okay.
Cleveland bomb technicians back then say if that one went off, there would have been a whole lot more damage to the
Yeah.
surrounding buildings. And you know,
So,
to this day, there's a small empty lot where that building
oh,
is
is there? Oh,
in
cool.
Collinwood on Waterloo Road in Collinwood. And years ago, some member of the community, or as part of some community organization, they painted a mural on the side of the next building, and it says "Kaboom," and it's got all these bright colors, and that thing is still there. You know,
That's awesome. I
yeah,
love it.
sort of a memorial to Danny Green. They really should
Yeah.
have like a plate in the ground or something, or on the wall explaining what "Kaboom" means
Kaboom is sure.
for
That's awesome.
visitors.
So,
You know.
your book gets turned into a movie. That's like almost every writer's dream come true. It's like, oh, cool. My book how did that happen?
Yeah. Well, the way you say it, the way we say, yeah, it was adapted for a film. It sounds like that happened quickly. That was such a long process. There was, before the book even came out, there was an article. It was like, I think it was a sergeant maybe at the time, said police sergeant writing book about Danny Green. Well, there was this young producer that graduated from Ohio State University and the New York Film Academy. His name was Tommy Reed. He is of Italian and Irish descent, and he wanted to make his first movie to be something about Irish, something about Italian. So he hears about Danny Green, you know, this
Oh,
Irish American racketeer going up against the mafia, and he falls in love with the story. He gets the book, and pretty soon I've got an offer. I obtain an agent, and now there's an option on the book.
yeah.
Uh, that was about was it 1998. It did not really take off until what was it, maybe 2008.
Yeah,
And
nothing happens quick. Yeah, you're absolutely right
yeah,
about that.
it took quite a while. Another group, you had Tommy's production company. Then you had Code Entertainment. He partnered with them, and then things started moving forward in 2008, and it was filmed in 2009 and came
Okay.
out in 2011.
Gotcha. Now, let me ask you this. What did it feel like the first time you went to the theater and saw this movie, and it's like, oh my God, that's my story. I wrote this book.
Yeah, I can't describe the feeling. You know, I was on the set. Unfortunately, because of the film tax rebate, the economics and financial picture back then, it was filmed in Detroit.
Okay.
And so Detroit played Cleveland, another
Yeah.
front city gritty, another gritty, similar type city.
Sure.
And so just to see the scenes being
Yeah.
played. Of course, the screenplay is the Hollywood version of the story,
Sure.
but the essence of the Danny Green story is they captured the essence of Danny Green, the
Yeah.
character story. But just to see these scenes coming alive, there was nothing like it. It was such a good feeling that this was coming to life, and it all stemmed from all of this research that I did into this phenomenal story, this crazy character, and this historic period of time. And then when I actually saw it for the first time, the same feeling, but now I'm seeing the whole movie, and
Oh, how
I
cool would
just
that be?
shake my head. I'd walk into a drugstore with my wife, go run an errand, pick up something, and they have it's back when they had the big DVD section. I
Yeah.
look, and there's the movie. I think the first time I did that, I said, "Here, take a picture." I pick up the DVD and took a picture. Such a wonderful feeling that it was able to get made. You had such dedicated filmmakers that worked together. Everything came together, and the ensemble cast is fantastic talent. Ray Stevenson played Danny Green. Unfortunately, he passed away suddenly not that long ago, within a year.
Mm.
Vincent D'Onofrio and Val Kilmer and
Yeah, that's right. Val Kilmer. Yeah, kind
Christopher
of a
Walken
a
and just
that's right. Yeah, that's I
yeah,
was watching
just
that and I didn't realize all these people were in this movie. And I'm just like, oh my God, there's Christopher Walken. Oh shit, there's Val Kilmer. And I'm like,
so
wow, this
very
is
very
really cool.
exciting for me. Very exciting for me.
That's all. Did you meet all these people?
I met a few of them. I didn't meet all of them.
Okay.
Yeah, I did meet a few. Ray Stevenson, and took some pictures, and
Yeah.
good time. We had a premiere here in Cleveland. I set up a nice party, and
Mm.
Tommy Reed came in, and it was able to get Ray Stevenson came in,
Yeah.
and so people took pictures with him. So it was nice. And then there was a premiere in New York, and my wife and I attended that, and
Oh, that's
yeah, it was a
great.
big lot of hoopla, but it was a long time, and
Yeah,
and
a lot of
that's
hard
that's
work
just the way it
and
works.
yeah.
That's the way it works.
So yeah, I was going to ask you, how do we get our books turned into movies?
Yeah, well, I get asked that sometimes, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, I can't say like how you do it so much is because it wasn't that I did it, but it happened to me. I was
Yeah.
actually contacted by a rookie producer, and then a guy who wanted to make movies but wasn't even trained. He didn't go to school for it,
Okay.
and so I actually had two people that were interested in making the movie, but Tommy Reed was the one who really he was the one who had the vision and was determined to make this thing. The guy was just on fire with his ambition. He's going to make this happen, and it's not going to go straight to DVD. It's going to come out in the theaters. It did,
Right.
and then like I said, he partnered with Code Entertainment, and so just to be part of that whole thing was just quite an experience. But how do you do it now? I think you have to get connected to somebody who's in the business, whether
Yeah.
a producer, a director, maybe an investor, and I suppose if you have somebody, if I had an investor, who could come in with $500,000 to start the ball rolling, I would probably be able to attract the interest of a production
Sure.
company, producer.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Absent that, it's tough, because there's so many properties out there,
well, and
original screenplays, short stories, books,
the movie business is, a different bird now. It's all streaming services. A lot of people don't go to theaters anymore. We've got really nice TVs. You could get a very affordable TV that, doesn't fit in my house. I go to Costco and I'm
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
holy,
right, right, right.
these things are ginormous.
Right,
And
but the movies still have to get made, and the
yeah,
series still have to get
absolutely.
made.
But
So
it's
they
just,
need
it's a
what's the
different,
saying for that business? The content. Content is
yes,
king. You've got to
absolutely.
have content. We want a lot of choices. The days of having three network stations, that's passe, man.
Oh
That's what
yeah,
that's when we were
absolutely.
kids.
Yep.
Now people want a lot of of choices and there's a lot of money to be made, but they have to have content.
Right.
So it's possible. But people will ask me that, even just writing a book, which is a hell of a lot easier, but is still a major feat. And I get a lot
Oh
of
yeah.
people that I've sort of that have consulted with me. And first thing I say, it's a major commitment. What are your goals? You know, is
Right.
your goal to write a bestseller, make $1 million? I don't want to discourage you, but let's take a look at what that would look like. Let's look at your story, and a lot of people want to write a story about their life, and they'll tell me, well, look, this interesting thing happened, then this happened, then when I was 25, this happened, then I was 30, this happened. It's like those are all anecdotes. There's got to be a story. There's got to be a
Sure.
beginning, middle, and an end. There's got to be a thread that goes through that
Yep.
time together.
Absolutely.
There's got to be a theme. There's got to be a tone. It's got to fit within a genre. So, and believe me, Patrick, I'm still learning these things.
Oh,
I'm still
absolutely.
learning as I go.
Yeah, I've been doing it for about 10 years and I still feel like a rookie so many times. It's like, so, I start talking to somebody like you that knows a lot more about this and has had some really good success. And I'm like, all right, I got to try harder, or whatever, yeah, it's humbling. That's for sure. That's for sure. But you're always
It is.
learning there.
Yes. But it's a
Absolutely.
great thing to be doing, to be
It
writing a
is.
book or to have written a book or to be publishing a book or promoting a book. It's a wonderful, wonderful accomplishment. You just got to do it the right way.
You know, I've said it 100 times. I'll say it 101 times. My hat is off to anybody that hits that publish button on a book because everybody talks about it's like, yeah, I've got this story, I've got X, Y, and Z, blah blah blah, but it takes hard work and just tenacity to just and grit to hang in there and actually do the work. Then it takes like gigantic balls to hit publish, and because you're literally putting yourself out there,
Yeah,
all the
you're taking
trolls,
your
all the
baby, you're
yeah.
putting it out to the world with all the criticism that's going to come.
Yep.
I published my first, my it was my second book, my first self-published book. I did it on a shoestring budget, and there were about 30 typos in this thing. Oh my God, 30 typos. My first printing was maybe 2,500 books. Fortunately, it kept selling. It kept selling. So I'd be
Okay.
able to go back to print and I kept cleaning up the typos because I made a big mistake. I did not have a professional proofreader. I
Oh,
had
okay.
someone that was helping me do editing and helping me do
Yeah.
proofreading. Those are professional jobs. You
Yes.
can't have an amateur editor. You can't have
No,
an
no.
amateur proofreader. I'm thankful to everyone. All of my beta readers will take a look and make
Yeah.
suggestions. But editing and proofreading, you
Oof.
got to have a professional.
I
But see, now it's
totally
so
agree.
easy, like you say, hitting that publish button. You don't have the New York publishing mill that you got
No,
to
the
get.
gatekeepers are gone. Yeah, I
Right.
mean, but again, it takes a lot of guts.
Yeah.
And I just have nothing but respect for people who hit that publish button and throw themselves out there into the world. That's tough. So
Yeah. No
how
doubt.
about you? Where are we at in your writing career? What's the next book?
So I'm working on my memoir about growing up in a musical family, going to work with Sammy Davis Jr., following in my brother's musical shadow, and then having this pull of police work to take me out of like the top of this industry, working for this major entertainer. And that's the first book, I think I said earlier, that I ever envisioned writing, but it went on
Yeah,
the back burner for a long time because I got interested in my grandfather's murder and writing about the
sure.
mafia and all that. So I'm back to working on that. It's a difficult thing. There's emotion involved. It's a different kind of
Oh,
writing.
sure, sure.
But I'm having fun with it, and I'm getting there. Got a couple of other book projects that are in development,
Hmm.
and so I'm fingers crossed with that.
Well,
And
when your next
just
book comes out, I definitely want you back, and we'll chat about
thank
your
you.
next one for
Love
sure.
to love to be back. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll tell you what, we're a little bit over on time here, which is okay. That's usually the way it goes. So let's wrap this up. Where can people go to learn more about you and your books?
Yeah, my website's probably the best spot, rickporrello.com. And there's one section where all the books and there's summaries and there's links if you want to look more, purchase the book. I always tell people if they're interested in buying a book, go to your local bookstore.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Sometimes they struggle to compete with the
Yep.
big stores and the online stores. If you buy online, that's great. But if you got a bookstore nearby that you can patronize, go there first. But my website, rickporrello.com, I have a author page on Facebook. And pretty easy to find because I've been doing this for quite a while.
All
My
right.
my my first website actually is AmericanMafia.com. This is a legacy website. This thing is so old. My partner Tom, he keeps this thing going. He loves it. It's a labor of
Yeah.
love for him. And there's a lot of good stuff. We've had a lot of great contributors over the years, and the
Very good.
website's still up.
All right. Well, let's wrap this up, Rick. Thank you so much for being on the show. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you, Patrick. I appreciate your interest.